So today we're delighted to have numerous stakeholders up at the front. There's ZRBF, represented by Kudzi, and Coopers, I think, represented by Joseph, who will give the presentation. Then Petrus, I think you'll come and have a conversation up here a bit later. So great to have everyone. And the topic, of course, is acaricides and the sustainable dipping model that I think was put in place some years back. And we're going to learn about that journey and how, you know, that maybe the lessons learned, but also the successes that it's had. So Joseph, if you wouldn't mind to come up, and we'll switch over to the PowerPoint. X marks this page.
Okay, so thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Joseph Kamjani, and I work for the Shumba Group, and my responsibility is to coordinate community projects almost. So what I want to try and do is to take you briefly through the community dipping model that we've been working with since 2020. And I'm very happy that Kudzi is here because she's also one of the pioneers of the model. So I think the scenario that I would like to talk about is the tragedy that befell the country between 2017 and 2019, where it's reported that the country lost over 500,000 head of cattle, and those are reported cases. So we think that maybe more cattle would have been lost during that period. And the reason why the cattle were lost is because of dipping challenges. So what we have is a vicious cycle where on one hand, the farmers are not paying dipping levy because Department of Veterinary Services is not supplying the acaricide. And then the Department of Veterinary Services say they cannot supply the acaricide because the farmers are not paying. At the end of the day, there's actually no dipping. What then happened is that, okay, so I just put some graphics here to show you where the problem started, which is the ticks. The result, this is the picture that made the headlines in the country, I think. And then this is what we are trying to do at the end of the day to make sure that every animal in the country, every cow is dipping. So I think the first slide was about the introduction to the group. We have basically three arms of the group. We've got Coopers, which is responsible for animal health. We've got Ecomark, which is responsible for environmental health. And then we've got Ecomed Manufacturing, which produces all the products that we put on the market. So like I said, the tragedy is 500,000 cattle. The part of it was erratic supply, but also dilapidated dipping infrastructure. So the analogy that we use is that if you use an arbitrary figure of 400 US per animal, and you multiply that by 500,000, the country potentially lost $200 million US in 2 years. Okay. But what we also try to do was, if you work with an average female head in any crow of 78%, it's very difficult to quantify the loss, because at the end of the day, we don't know how many cows that cow was going to drop. But also communal farmers in Zimbabwe depend on draft power. So we know that there are a lot of communities that suffered because of that. And there's no coincidence that the popularization of Fumbudza was around the same period, because people had no draft power. So the response, the government, through the Department of Veterinary Services, with support from ZRBF, launched a national program to address the supply side of the dipping chemicals. So it was supposed to do supply of acaricide, training and capacity building of farmers and extension staff on livestock. But the program was also started in order to strengthen the livestock development committees, which are responsible for dipping at the local level. So the initial funding for the program was provided under the ZRBF and also the LFSP. And what the model did was that it supported farmers in 22 districts of ZRBF and 8 of LFSP, with 6 months supply of acaricide. And during that period, the farmers were supposed to mobilize their own resources. So as Coopers, we won the contract to supply the acaricide for the 6 months. And then this was supposed to be a pilot to see whether it would work. But we then decided just to continue rolling with the program. So on the map there is the districts in green are the areas where the program actually started. But the areas in yellow, from a Cooper's point of view, and in terms of a natural expansion of the program, those are the areas that we think we can still go. What you will find on that map is that most of the areas covered are actually in the southern part of the country, where we've got our biggest hit in any case. So how does the model work? So the LDCs, they mobilize, the farmers put their money together through the support from the LDCs. And then the funds are put together and they are taken to the Animal Health Management Center. I apologize for the colors, to the Animal Health Management Center, which is like a conglomeration of 5 or so deep tanks. And then DVS alerts Coopers as to the amount that has been collected. And then Coopers actually what it does is that we then deliver the supply of acaricide. So this is a transaction almost between the farmer and Coopers. So what we just need to know is how much the farmers have put together, and then we supply. So the farmers can pay in any currency, EcoCash, RTGS, USD, and in the southern part of the country, they also use the rand. So what we do is, because we are on the farmers WhatsApp groups, we just advise them what is the cost of their acaricide if it's in local currency rate that will be using. A lot of work, I think especially through ZRBF, has been done at LDC level to make sure that these committees are aware of what it means to collect the money and then how to calculate it so that they know how much acaricide that they are buying. So I put this table here just to show you what has happened. These are the results now of what has happened. So the program started March 2020, just as COVID came in. And up to June 2022, we had sold 45 tons of acaricide. This is a direct transaction to a value of about 1.6 million almost. And I was talking to Kudza just now. No, none of us within Cooper ever imagined that something like this would happen. But what it also means to us is that some of the questions that I think would like to pose globally is, what does this mean for the development conceptual framework that says rural farmers are poor and they can't look after themselves? What does that mean? So some of the LDCs are actually purchase stocks to last until mid-2023. From a business point of view, this is not very good news for us. But from a dipping point of view, it means that we can almost guarantee the survival of the animals. So just a few graphs to show what we are talking about. So in blue is the number of reported cases. And you can see as we go from 2019 to 2021, the graph starts to dip. But it's also the same when you look at the number of deaths dipping around, going down around the same time. When you look, the line that is almost yellowish, which has got a spike in 2020 to 2019 to 2021, that's January disease, which we are actually fighting against. And you can see how it is dropping. And this information is coming from DVS, how it is dropping over the same period that the model is taking place. This last diagram talks about the supply of acaricide, and then we're trying to relate it. Even if you look also what has been happening, the dip between about 2016 to about 2018, and how it has gone up in terms of the total. And this is the 3 main suppliers of acaricide in Zimbabwe. So there's a direct relationship between the supply of acaricide and the number of cases that are going down as far as dipping is concerned. So one of the things that we also focused on as Coopers, and we are also taking a lot of interest in it, is that it's one good thing to supply the acaricide, but if the dipping infrastructure is not okay, then the animals are also not going to dip. So you may solve one problem, but you also create another problem. So we are working with communities right now to rehabilitate some of their deep tanks. What the model does is that the communities supply all locally available materials, pits and rivers and the bricks and so on and so forth. And then we come in at a very small cost with the equipment that they can't. So on the right as I stand, this is what the deep tank looked like before, and that's what it is looking like now. You know, and this is happening almost throughout the country as we speak right now. So what we have also decided to do is that we need to broaden the scope of the program because it doesn't make sense for a truck to come from Coopers just with a caricide. And yet we know that the farmers are also looking for other animal health products, but also the same farmer who is doing livestock is also doing crops. So we also carry with us all the products that we think a farmer will need. So we've been in discussions with MCMIS because they are our partner on another program that we are running to see if they cannot also give back to the communities the same way that we are doing. So according to this model, what we are saying is that if a certain deep tank is doing very well in terms of buying a caricide, MCMIS actually goes and buys cattle from there, but they also leave a portion of their profit so that the farmers can rehabilitate their dipping infrastructure. In Matobo, we are supporting the farmers. This house come office is being built by the farmers using their own resources because it's quite far away from anywhere, and the DVS staff don't have any offices. But this is an initiative in a district which was not initially part of the ZRPA, but they've caught on to it and are actually doing very well. In Binga, most of the farmers are using spray acids, but 3 communities have started to build their own plant strips. And we're also just supporting one of them to complete. So as I come to the end of the presentation, our argument is that dipping is an important part of animal health, but it's not the most important when you look at the value chain. So you cannot talk about it in isolation. You also need to understand what else you need to do around that. Our interest is to make sure that the pilot program, which started in 2020, actually graduates into a national program. And that's why we've been trying to interest DVS to make at least a commitment as to how far we'll move. The chances of the program collapsing as a result of not institutionalizing it are high, actually. And we think DVS should just be bold enough and say this is a model that can be used throughout the country. What we have also found, which is quite interesting, is that especially in the 4 provinces where we are working, there are different models. So we are not really like selecting this is the best model. We are saying each province can use whatever model they think that they're comfortable with. What is important at the end of the day is that the animals are living. So that's the presentation. I'm very happy that there's a panel, so I don't have to respond to any question.
Maybe there'll be some questions after the panel. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
So Petrus and Kuzi, would you like to come down? So I just received apologies from DVS, Joseph, that they've been pulled in other directions and are unable to make it today.
I'm trying to get him to connect to Wi-Fi, so that I share is the diagram I'd like him to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
So raising their hand. Joseph.
So how many online?
Okay. We're on 16.
Okay. I think many people are still in COVID mindset. But I've just developed a few discussion points here, which we can sort of stick to loosely or as a conversation, because basically it's the conversation about so I thought maybe we could just start off with some sort of introductions. Maybe start with you, Petrus, just of your own individual experience in animal health and then that of the organization that you're representing today.
Mike, thanks very much. My name is Petrus Erasmus. I'm the general manager at Cooper Zimbabwe. And yeah, as Joseph, it's really an extension of what Joseph has spoken about. We've been supplying animal health products into the industry for decades now. The Cooper's brand obviously is a brand that's over 100 years old, with tried and tested products. And yeah, basically provides a comprehensive solution of animal health products to the industry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's.
And I think you're also a cattle breeder yourself.
For sure, yeah. In a private capacity, I come from a family of cattle breeders, so we breed pedigree cattle. Have done so since, well, for the last 50 years as a family. So yes, basically wearing both hats of on the animal health side, as well as being a customer to Cooper's as well, and being on the receiving end of some of these diseases also that we talk about. So yeah.
Good, thanks, Pepus. And Kuzai?
Good afternoon once again. I come from the face of ZRB, should I say, the pioneers of this model, which when it started, we actually didn't know it would go this far. If I'm to give a bit of history, I will go back to 2019 when I was the deputy head of project, and my then boss, Stefan Petitpré, penciled this model down, and it was in response to a tick-borne disease outbreak, and we were not prepared to give free acaricide. So he designed a model. I was actually on maternity leave. So
for the first time?
Yes, for the first time. And he designed a model where he said, let's give 2 cycles of acaricide and the farmers pay for the third, and then we give 2 cycles and the farmers pay for the third. And then just as I came back from maternity leave, he was leaving and I took over. And the team wanted to drop the model. And I wasn't convinced. And I was like, let's try it. Let's see how it'll work. Our approach wasn't very strategic, the communication with the communities, etc. But 40% of the communities responded to our unstructured communication, etc. And then that's when it was scaled in 2020, half the districts in the country by FAO and UNDP. And yeah, we didn't know that it would go this far, and pleasantly surprised to have that on the table. So over the course of the program, we went on and selected 17, okay, of the, I think he said 45 tons or something. The districts under the project that I was implementing account for 10% of that. So for us, that's a very great success. So we went on to choose 18 of the dip tanks that had raised acaricides, had bought acaricide for 6 months or more. And we layered other activities like breed increasement, trying to get them to aggregate and market, trying to produce fodder. And we call that a livestock center of excellence. It needed more time. The results, by the time this phase of the project ended, the results were not yet where we thought they would be, but we felt that these drip tanks that had the capacity and organization to buy acaricide for a year in advance, even after a little bit of training, were centers of lessons. There's something we can learn from them, and they destroy the myth that communities are helpless, poor, can't do anything. So we wanted to build onto that. So I would hope that this is something the platform can talk about. And then we also went and took the same model and applied it to water infrastructure maintenance. So starting August last year, we trained communities on borehole maintenance, environmental management, highlighting the need to protect the water resources. And the results are equally amazing. I shared something with Tony, maybe over the booklet. Does it come? Let me give you. Equally amazing communities taking down infrastructure. Yeah, taking down wood tree poles, erecting their own fences, building ablutions around their own water points, aggregating money for repair and maintenance. The same, deconstructing the same model that they're helpless and NGOs always need to come and repair. So I think we're onto something, and I hope this house can be the point to carry this through, because ZRIBF has come to an end. We don't know whether it's going to continue. We're hoping for phase 2, but it needs more than the NGOs. And I'm really, really excited about how Coopers has taken this on and is running with the torch. And we need to get the government on board. And I think we need to get as many development partners, not only ZRBF, because I think they are important in subsidizing the cost of entry into getting this model running. We need to get it because I think that's the direction development programs need to go.
Thanks, Kuzi. So it's great that we've got a member, obviously, of the development sector, but also from the private sector. So we've got the two different ways of looking at this model. So Petrus, from your point of view as a supplier, what would have been the lessons learned in the past years?
Michael, I think in the past years, lessons we've learned is, I think Joseph touched on it in his presentation, is that there's no one size fits all in this process. It's a question of engaging with communities and trying to also understand the processes that work for them in reaching these objectives. And it's certainly, you know, I think we came from a point of view where we felt that we'll do it in a particular manner and then just roll it out that way. And it's more complicated than that. You've got different communities wanting to work in different ways.
What are some of the examples of community A and community B? I mean, how?
Well, I think just, you know, the physical logistics around a lot of these sorts of programs is you've got certain communities, which Joseph may be able to elaborate a bit further on, but you've got some areas where logistically it's a lot easier than others, where you can deliver centrally. The infrastructure and the framework is there for product to be delivered to where it needs to be. Then you've got other communities where that just doesn't work. There is no, for whatever reason, there's no real framework to facilitate that. And it's a question of actually reaching out to individual dip tanks, which makes things a lot more difficult. So it's also finding the balance of, you know, making it work commercially as well from a private sector point of view. You know, it makes you think carefully about how you make that model work. And that's really just a practical example of different.
So not only how, but where, because some areas the costs are just going to be too high to viably to deliver a carry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and you've just got to, but it's quite an emotional thing, you know, because you've got communities who are owners of livestock who need to, they're concerned about the animal health aspects of those animals, and they're putting their hands in their pockets to pay. So it's a question of also you know trying to find that common ground as to what works for both parties,
and also how coordinated the community is.
Absolutely, it makes a huge difference. You know, we've had certain communities, Joseph, you'll attest, that are very organized, and you've got other communities that are lesser organized. You know, it's like with everything, you have those differences. So there's no one size fits all. It's a question of really engaging the communities, working with them, and seeing how best you can roll that out.
And could I just thinking specifically on the Claricide model, what have been the main 3 lessons, if you like, that from a development perspective?
The greatest lesson for us was Department of Veterinary Services is key. We had an award ceremony to award the highest performing dip tanks. And the common denominator behind the highest performing dip tanks was a motivated Department for Veterinary Extension Services employee.
Okay.
We believed in the model, trained the communities. Those were the communities that had 12 months supply ahead of them, 6 months supply ahead of them. Then I do worry about the security of cash payment. I remember just before I think it's one of these SI instruments that banned EcoCash. There was a time when EcoCash had banned. We had engaged EcoCash, and each dip tank had been set up as a merchant, and it was part of the security measures. And the payments could go from the farmer to the dip tank as a merchant. But from the dip tank, there was only one way it could go. The person in charge of the phone with that merchant code could not put it anywhere else except to the selected supplier. And EcoCash had given us merchant codes for all the dip tanks in our area. And just before we rolled it out, that's when EcoCash was banned. I do worry about the financial security of someone holding that much cash. From the point of view of thieves attacking them, as well as from a point of view to misuse the fund. So I hope something can be thought about that, or maybe now that EcoCash is working, can we go back to considering that model? I know that it puts the commercial sector in a position where maybe they don't want to handle large volumes of RTGS. But I'm just saying, now that there's a US dollar EcoCash wallet, it's complicated.
Yes.
Because then you have to think about the situation in the rural area. I don't know about whether I can think of.
Well, we won't put you under pressure to think of another one.
But the third one, don't drop the model. Don't drop the model. Don't drop the model.
All right.
We come too far.
I think also just to add there, I think because I brought up a very important point is the importance of the structures of the DVS throughout the country. It's incredibly important to make any of these sorts of projects work. So yeah, that cannot be overemphasized. Yeah.
So what we've learned is that ZRBF and I guess the LFSP program, they sort of took this up and used sort of donor finance to get it up and running, and then Coopers came in on that wave. Now that money has disappeared. Is the thing going to collapse, or is Coopers able to sustain, maybe through some careful selection of particular dip tanks, which are going to be viable? Maybe that's happening already. What's
For sure, I think it's an important point. Yes, I was chatting to one of our colleagues earlier that ZWF and the UNDP funding was there initially. It did come to an end. And I think that's the interesting point of engaging those communities, as what the process was explained about earlier, is that communities realize the importance of continuing with this to save their cattle. So it wasn't really anything we did apart from continuing with training, continuing with support of those communities, so that it really moved into that commercial phase of a supplier customer type relationship, being supported with training and with that sort of thing. So to answer your question as to whether it will sort of fail, I don't think so. I think that it can only get stronger. Obviously, I think support is needed in opening new districts, new territories, because there's a big upfront requirement of engagement with local leadership, the communities themselves, the LDCs, the veterinary department. So there's a lot of moving parts in bringing all of that together. So there is certainly room for participation by development partners, but at the same time, it's something, as you mentioned there, that we've got to take into account in looking at the commercial viability of the project. And we've again got to balance and make sure and learn. We're learning all the time as to how we can do these engagements more efficiently, to make it work. But I think definitely there is certainly the start of a longer term commercial relationship between those communities and the private sector.
So then would it be safe to say that Coopers is sort of getting maybe not huge orders, but continual
orders, absolutely.
from different takes?
It's now become a monthly aspect of our business. and we've got specific people within our teams that are dealing with those portions of the business.
Okay, so MC Meats was planning to be with us today, but didn't manage to make it, I don't think. But I was then thinking of other services besides the dipping chemicals. And Joseph mentioned this strategic engagement with MC Meats, whereas they then provide an offtake and maybe other services. So that's has that been implemented, or is that some sort of just an idea at the moment?
It's certainly, you know, we could say over the last few years, our engagement with MC Meats has been one that, you know, where communities are interested in reaching a market, that they've come in and provided such a market, and really whoever's interested in doing that. So it's really linking the communities with a sustainable and a fair market system where they want to dispose of their cattle, because, you know, effectively the animals are being managed better, the animal health is better, so production should be better. So there is more offtake to be had. And so yes, so that discussion is there all the time. And again, it's not something that happens all the time, but it depends on the needs of the community.
Okay.
The other interesting thing is that you know, it does open the door to other portions of our business as well, where you now move away from just providing acaricides, but it allows you to talk about grain protection. It allows you to talk about other remedies that are needed, and so on. So it definitely provides a platform, I think, for building something on a commercial basis.
Okay. That's fantastic. So if we're now thinking of so we have the acaricide model in its current state, and it does seem to be going forward. The role of the development partners, I think you mentioned, is very important. They're a trusted partner with farmers in the communities, and you know, when Coopers comes in, it's not necessarily a stranger, so we can get some traction there. What other roles do you think that, besides buying the different chemical, that development partners could play in order to increase the amount of uptake?
Well, I think it's, you know, what we've seen in the past from our relationship with various development partners is just that capacity building of communities, be it through training, which may not be linked directly to selling of acaricides or products. You know, we've entered into certain arrangements and agreements in the past where we've rolled out our training in primary animal health care, which is identification of first signs of disease and remedial action to be taken. Those sorts of models are there and have been very successful in the first step to try and commercialize, in essence, the livestock being held by the rural communities. So I think it really comes back to that capacity building at grassroots level, and building from there, because then these other things sort of slot into that. But if, as Joseph said earlier, you know, a lot of our training fundamentally is driven by what is the value of that asset to the rural farmer. And once that message starts getting through, and by doing the right things with that asset, you can increase that. And then it links into all of these other things, be it nutrition, be it animal health, be it those sorts of things. Yeah.
So both of you, I know at one stage, development partners were investigating the spray, the sort of the movable spray type of operation instead of the plunged pool. Is anyone aware of what's happened with that, or?
I know there's been some sort of private initiatives that we've certainly worked with certain people in our customer base who, through outgrow schemes and so on, have started looking at that. So it's not been done, I think, on a broad scale, but certainly there are pockets of this taking place where you've got an entity that possibly has an outgrow scheme of their own that they're trying to build, and that is part of the sort of service that can be provided. It comes with its own
Challenges,
peculiarities, but certainly is something to be looked at.
Okay. Great. So I'd like to just then broaden the conversation to everyone here. Maybe there's some points that we haven't sort of touched on, or maybe some questions. And also, I don't know, online, are there any questions, Tony?
Yes, several.
There's several questions. So I'm not online. Anyway, Jane.
Yeah, I'd like to just take you back to one of your early comments about the sort of logistics of the distribution network, because I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Because back in 2019, the way government provided parasites, they'd obviously put it in order to yourselves. You would centrally deliver it, and then government distributed their parasites to communities. So we've now gone to a system where, much as you prefer to deliver to a central place, it's not happening. So now you have to develop a network of getting parasites to the dip tanks. And I mean, you touched on that a little bit, but I think that's probably is a huge challenge. And the areas where it's actually worked is where you've had a Cooper's agent nearby. I spent some time in Iberia and it worked brilliantly there because the Cooper's agent, the late Cooper's agent, came into that area. So it works superbly. But in places like Kariba, where even DBS is not located there, you don't have any way. I mean, I'm interested to know what systems you're now developing to actually deliver those parasites, because when I was doing some work on the evaluation of the model back in sort of 21, there were lots of dip tanks sitting on money that they could, and they were not connected with yourselves. And I know it's partly due to the problem because I mentioned that the EcoCash system stopped working for them. But I think that's that it's not going to work unless you have a way of putting in an effective distribution network. And I think it's great as well thinking about what else services you can add on top of that. But I'd just like to hear a bit more about, what sort of network are you developing to get those parasites, not just to Mberi or some of the places in the size areas, but some of the areas which are not so close to those centres. I mean, getting them to Binga. How do you get into Binga? How do you get into Kariba? Because unless you have a mechanism where you can deliver to those areas, even if the farmers collect the money for their parasites, it's not getting to them.
I'm going to pass that ball to you, Joseph, because and just before you take that up, it's a very valid point, and it is one that, especially from a cost point of view, you've got to have the right. Simple things have to have the right vehicle, because generally the vehicle that the person is in may not even get to where it needs to go, etc. So it is a major challenge. At this point in time, we're getting around that by physically making a plan to get there, which is not necessarily the most efficient way. And that is where Joseph is engaging now with leadership within those communities to see how that can be improved. But if I can hand over to you, Joseph, you've been to a lot of those places recently that Jan is talking about, the Bingas of this world. How are we dealing with that?
Okay, thanks for giving me that question. So when the model started, we were actually going from deep tank to deep tank. Throughout the 20.
There was there's over 1,000.
Yeah.
You can't get to all of them.
Yeah, but we're going to deep tank by deep tank, because that's how the model initially was designed. And then it graduated. So instead of going to the deep tank, we started going to the animal health management center. Because animal health management is responsible for 5 or 6 of deep tanks in a particular area. If you take the Midlands, what they've done in the Midlands is that each deep tank is with an LDC, the Livestock Development Committee. What they've now done is that each district now is with a district livestock development committee. So they've almost set up a committee which is represented for. So in the Midland, for example, we just go to one center. If it's Gogo South, we just go to Gogo. We leave the parasite and get the money there. What we see is that fewer and fewer districts are insisting that we go deep tank by deep tank. Because even for them, because when we go like what Pedro and Kuda have said, when we go with DBS. So it also means that you are taking someone for a week, for example, to go around. So they're also trying to, how do we get put the deep tanks which are closer to each other, just to make sure that we reduce the cost both for ourselves and for DBS. There's another program which is going on under the Zimbabwe Agriculture Growth Program, the SAFE program, which is being run by FAO. What they're trying to do is to get the animal health management center to be like commercial centers. And I think that's one way of trying to get, around this program, because then even ourselves, we're bidded for some of those AHMC so that we can actually place our people. And our people will be responsible for coordinating the tipping program. But like we're also saying, the other programs around animal health and agriculture in general. It's a tricky situation, but we're like Petra said, we treat each case differently, and then we just try to make sure that we maximize in terms of distribution. It's an area that we still need to work on, because otherwise it can derail the whole program. So yeah.
So you're not going to have any reps in any of those areas, or get any of the retail outlets to start stocking your products?
So as a group, we don't have like retail outlets ourselves. So we retail through other people. But I think there's a conversation there. With Animal Health Management Center, it allows us to do that. So it's an avenue that we are pursuing seriously to understand how this can contribute.
May I jump in? But Binga, it's a good example of a very remote area. I mean, it just wouldn't be viable for Coopers to serve Binga.
But then you have to find some way of getting the parasites to there. I mean, I know some of the issues also are whether the farmers, the LDCs, give the money to DBS and then DBS contacts Coopers, or whether, originally the dip tanks were supposed to contact Coopers direct, but most of them have no direct numbers for Coopers. And also, I know from the ZIF point of view, Coopers is not the only, they don't have to go through Coopers, it's farmers' own money. So, whilst you won the tender to provide the 6 months for the subsidized, for the subsidized parasites, that's back in 2020. And none of those dip tanks actually have to come to you, they can go anywhere to get those parasites. But it still is, the model has huge potential, but if there's no way of getting the money the farmers have collected to the supplier, and the supplier getting the parasites of the farmer, it breaks down in certain areas apart from those that are really close to Bulawayo or Harare, or have the DBS person living in their area.
And certainly if I was the private sector, those are the areas that I would focus on.
Yeah.
But can I just say something? Maybe true. So this is the reason why we are saying, make it a national program. Okay. Because I can still go to Binga, but when I go to Binga, I pass through Lupani, I pass through Kai, I pass through all these places.
Those are all part of ZWF.
No, I'm saying, I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah.
With areas that are not part of the program. Okay. So if Lupani and Wange are part of the program, I can still go to Binga, but I know that on the way I'm doing business. So that's why it's even with Kariba, it's very far, but they've got cattle there, and we don't want them to die. Okay. So I need Makonde to be part of the program. I need Urumbe to be part of
there has to be that, and that was, you started off your thing by saying government and Coopers. There is no national director at the moment for this program, and that is a big issue as well, because in some areas, not even the traditional leaders are supporting it, and in some areas even DBS is not supporting it, and government actually undermines it as well, because there's politics comes in there, there's elections coming up. So just as you're getting farmers to contribute to their own parasites, then government comes in with freer parasites. So, without a national directive, it's an issue, and quite generally for the private sector, it is going to, it's not cost effective to go to certain areas. And, if there's a national directive, then maybe DBS would take a bit more role in trying to get those parasites to the areas. But DBS is not even in Kariba, they sit in Karoi, so they're not going to take them there either. So, you'd be relying on donors a little bit to get the parasites to those dip tanks.
But and I guess what we wouldn't want to happen is for the price of a parasite in Binga to increase in order to cover the higher costs in getting it there, because those people are more remote and they're worse off generally.
The people in Benga and their parasites to them, you don't have to necessarily physically travel there. You know, the bulk of the parasites is not that great. You could put it on a truck or something, as long as there's a mechanism for getting the money, knowing that someone has in a dip tank in Benga has money to pay for parasites, is linked to you, and you have a way of getting them there. And I just don't see that system in place yet. So I think we need to get that system in place. And you can't rely on donors to deliver. You can't, we can't just have it going to the places where there's a close to Harare or Bulawayo.
Thanks, Joe.
Talking about being a specific, we're actually doing good business.
Well, that's good to hear.
Right now,
That's good to hear.
Because we have decided this is an area that has got a lot of potential. Okay. And we could actually go in, but the model cannot survive if we just take a carry side.
Yeah.
It has to be supported.
Yeah.
It has to be supported with other things, and that's what we're doing.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
I hope they stop getting funny on the way. You can't just kind of sit up here.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So we've got Mark Benson online, and it's more of a comment, I think. Fundamental to the sustainability of this type of initiative is the need for farmers to recognize and accept personal responsibility for the health of their animals and not to rely on government. Has there been any training in this aspect, maybe by Coopers or by ZRBF?
Can I give you that one?
I think Kuzai makes a good point to say that DVS is critical. So what we've done is we use DVS to talk about the technical issue. Most of our training is graduating from production and animal health and so on into how do you make livestock a commercial business for it. So that's the message that we're now taking to the farmers ourselves. So when we go there, we do the mathematics like I've done there to say, if you have got 10 head of cattle, you actually don't have 10 head of cattle. You have 10 cattle times $400. So that is like $4,000 that you have in your hands. And you have to look after it the same way that we look after 4,000 US with this cash. It's a long process because it's about transforming the mind. And if you saw the slide that I was trying to show, it's about transformation. And transformation is at these different levels. At government levels, at individual level, at community level in terms of their organization. Even ourselves, as a private company, it's also about transformation. I think the challenge that will come is when there are mixed messages coming from these players. Okay, when we come in and say we want to do a private sector exercise, and the NGO says no, but we also want to give them something for free, because that's going to kill what is going on. Or when, like she's rightly pointing out, government says now this is election time, we are going to give free acaricide to a farmer who is now used to buying the acaricide. And what's going to happen is to remotivate them to start buying is going to be a serious problem. So what we have found out is that the farmer actually now beginning to understand the value of their cattle. Some of them understand the fact that they are the ones who are responsible. Otherwise, they would not be bringing this money that they're bringing. Kuza is right. When the program was designed, it was based on eco-cash. Okay, it was based on eco-cash. At the moment, our business there's very little eco-cash that is going around. There's very little RTGS which is going around. The figures that I was showing you, 90% of it is USD or rand. And this is coming from the community. So, I think it's about rethinking ourselves, rethinking the development model and how best we can support the farmers to achieve the levels of prosperity that they should.
So I think Kuzai, Milana was singing from pretty much the same hymn book as Professor's just.
Yeah, we invested in a lot of training. We trained every single. We're working with 257 dip tanks in the 4 districts. That's Bubi, Umuguza, Mzengwane, and Kai. We trained every one of them, and we developed a very simple training manual to try and transform the mind. So yeah, a lot has been invested in training.
So from Basil here, and this one is targeting Coopers. The donors did support the initial phase of the model, and Coopers has run with the rest. What evidence does Coopers have to indicate sustainability, and have they put any further systems to gear up the business, not only to dipping chemicals, but to other inputs that the same farmers require, say for crops, poultry, horticulture, to make it more holistic. And I think we did probably touch on this.
Yeah, we did.
Petrus, yeah.
Yeah, we did touch on that, and yeah, so it's definitely something that is progressing into is other aspects of agriculture as well.
Okay.
Not necessarily just specific to what we can provide, but you know, if we've got people going there with and other items are needed, then we look at that.
Okay.
And that's what I think his first part of the question is, you know, we were able to run with that in sustainability. I think we've touched on that
We
as
have,
well.
I think, as well.
Yeah.
And then Richard, also from FAO, in the absence of government policy to support the model, how do participating dip tanks and DVS ensure compliance by all farmers? That probably would be good to touch on that.
Okay. Okay. I wouldn't say the government support is absent. It's fragmented because when UNDP and FAO rolled the model out to all the African countries, there was a letter sent around by the Department of Veterinary Services, and they actually communicated that these districts under ZRBF and LFSP are no longer submitting levy to the department. What is fragmented is the commitment and keeping the ball rolling, or not, to make sure that it becomes policy. So I think whenever we are coming to policy negotiations, and it's not going to be a walk in the park, especially given the period we're going into, we are not starting from zero. But okay, we are not very far, but we're not starting from zero. But yeah, the message is not everywhere. And last week, very senior officials in the Ministry of Agriculture was not aware of the model, and I was a bit taken aback. But there is work to do, and it must be done if the model is going to work.
Michael, can I just add?
Yes.
Because I think that is an important point in terms of what happens at the community level. I think when the program was designed, the way we, there was a key player who was not directly part of it. It's the traditional leadership. Okay. Because we're using the normal government structure. What we found out in the three provinces, especially Midlands, Mid North and Mid South, is that the support of the traditional leadership is key in making sure that this happens. Because whether it's happening or not, the traditional leader is supposed to be apolitical. All he's supposed to be is interested in the fact that there's development in their area. So that's what we've invested a lot of money into as Coopers, just to get the traditional leaders to understand the program that we're doing, and then calling on them to support in cases where there are people who are not playing ball with paying the monies and so on and so forth. That's one part of it. The second part of it is something that also was touched on by the panel, the community organization. So what's happening is we are seeing a trend where communities now realize if one farmer does not bring their animals to the dip tank, it's not only affecting their cattle, it's affecting everyone's cattle. Mm-hmm. And that message is getting across now. So even when you look at the LDC constitution that these guys supported, it's got those elements as to what happens if a farmer does not bring their animal to the dip, what happens if they don't pay. So at that local level, there are things that are going on that we just need to support. And to tell you the truth, we haven't had those problems coming into our faces like that. Some of the problems that we're having is some of the issues that she was talking about in terms of, and what she was also talking about. How would you make sure that the farmers don't hold on to the money for too long before you supply that kind of stuff? I think that the demand side is okay. What we may have to look at is the supply side. So, yeah. I think
you raised some interesting points, Joseph. Thank you. What the best performing dip tank under the Malana program, what sort of percentage of farmers registered to that dip tank actually paid?
Off the top of my head, I think it's 73%. But I'm not, I would need to check the records, but there is no dip tank where 100% of the farmers have paid.
So it's inevitable that these problems are going to, that's the best performing. 30% of the cattle are out there infecting other cattle.
Or the pig for free. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also think we need to take into account the fact that it's just 2 years old. there's a lot of work that still needs to be
Yeah.
done. But I think that there are more positives than negatives that are there.
Yes.
And we really need to address the negatives, but not at the expense of doing down the positives, which have already.
Yeah, but I think your point of investing in the traditional structures to try to motivate more buy-in is probably going to be a winner. From Basil again at FAO, how would you describe the LDCs as business partners, given the 3 years experience that you've worked with them? Given the fact that they are so varied, what is the scope of working with an agro-dealer who's already configured to run a business properly as an agent? So in other words, I think the LDCs, they're not really set up to do business, but maybe some sort of local retailer, an agro-dealer, could become the agent for Coopers and then be that.
Yeah, I think if I can pick that up, Michael, as Jan mentioned earlier, I think that is the key thing that we are looking at, is how can one utilize agro dealers in those particular hard to get to areas. Again, you know, there are agro dealers out there and there are agro dealers out there. So it's a question of, you know, for us, it's a relationship that we already have with that. Do we feel comfortable and do we have a reliable partner in that agro dealer? So it's a question of going through the business processes of identifying those partners who you can work with. And I think, again, an ongoing process, but certainly one that is that's very relevant, because it'll strengthen, it'll help us in cutting costs, as we've already spoken about. It will also strengthen the role of that agro dealer in that community as well, which is also something that we believe will lead to lots of good things, both commercially and socially within that district.
Thank you. From Jonathan at FAO, farmers need to have options. Why not restock agro dealers closer to farmers? I think it's more or less the same, and cover all the other inputs required by the same farmers. It becomes more of a market-based and overcomes a monopoly. So I think maybe that's sort of touching on the same sort of thing. Okay, great. I don't know this. Yes, please.
So my question is for Coopers with regards to tick resistance. As you know, different areas require different solutions. On the dip tank engagements, is Coopers catering to this, and is the model flexible enough to cater for and track this variation? And lastly, is this resistance knowledge being shared with DVS?
Yeah, Nick, thanks for the question. I think absolutely it is a conversation that we're having continually with DVS, and it comes up within communities all the time, and then it's dealt with on a case by case basis. So yes, there's absolute flexibility. Obviously, there are these structures out there as far as the way that the dipping takes place, the acaricide that is being used. So yes, that conversation is an ongoing conversation, and there is the flexibility to look at alternatives, but always very much in conjunction with DVS in that regard. There wouldn't be any intervention from Coopers without the guidance from DVS primarily in cases of resistance. But the resistance conversation is definitely one that is ongoing and alive.
Can I just so what is happening is that DVS is almost like divided the country. So in the southern part, it's more of the Amatic, that goes down there. And in the northern part, for example, in the area where she's talking about, we don't send Amatic, we send Objective, because that is what DVS wants. So it's DVS which sets the framework, and all we have to do is to make sure that we try with the standards on the carry side. And what we do is on a yearly basis, we are doing trials to make sure that we're together with DVS, just to try and understand, because I agree with you, this is one of the biggest problems that we have.
Okay, great. So are there any more discussion points?
Just want to ask a simple question about the dip tanks. What was the infrastructure like when you started? Was there a need to recondition any dip tanks? Did some have to be resealed or whatever it is you'd have to do? Have you got an idea what that would cost? And who owns those tanks? Are they owned by the communal people themselves, owning the communal lands, or are they owned by DVS?
Thanks. If I start at the last part of your question, the ownership, I'm not certain. I'm under the impression that they belong to the DVS, but yeah. Then if we come back to the first part of the question, if we look at when starting, the initial focus was not on the state of the dip tanks, to be honest. It was the question of working with usable dip tanks. But definitely there are a large number of dip tanks that need rehabilitation throughout the country. And that's not just physical rehabilitation to the structures, but it's also issues like lack of water, not being able to get water in. You've got a dip tank possibly that is pretty much functional, but there's no way of getting water into that dip tank. So those are some of the so it's varied. So you've got, Joseph, what would you say? There are some stats as to the percentage of dip tanks that are fully functional as compared to those that are not. I don't know if we've got that at the top of our head, but there are a large number that need significant rehabilitation, either physically, structurally, or due to lack of water. And then the rehabilitation issues that we've got involved with has been very specific to communities and not necessarily always linked to the ZWF project. It's in other districts as well. So Joseph can probably add a bit more to that as to how that happens in the processes.
So according to DVS, I think the chief director was saying that almost 60% of dip tanks, so they've got like 4,000 dip tanks in the country. Almost 60% are not functioning to the level that they're supposed to function. So they've got more that are not working to their level than those ones that are working to their level. But in terms of what needs to be done, it's also very different. Some of it is major works, others is very little. Yeah. Maybe it's leaking. So you sort that out, it costs you $500 and you're done. So it also varies in that regard. So
have they got the capacity to actually do the repairs? So they need like a really big boat from, is it Ministry of Public Construction or something that has to do it, or they got their own units? That
I think it would help if they could get a vote from government, but we know that that's not coming, at least anytime soon. But what we've worked with the community so far shows that it's possible that the communities can actually do it for themselves.
Yeah.
So
because in the area where we were in Wake Up with them, they had not been using this dip tank since 2018, and it's because it was leaking. And we got our guy to go in and do a technical assessment, and it came to $500. And the question that we were asking is how many stockholders are using this? 72. And we said, okay, simple mathematics. Each household just needs to provide $5, and then this $500 is there, and it can go. I think the other serious problem is that most of the dip tanks are really about pre-independence even. So, and if there are any new dip tanks planned that have been constructed by after independence, that would be very nice to go and see. Most of them should have been done before, so they are very old, and so these problems will happen. But some of them it's just there's no roof, for example, or the rest is not the way that it is supposed to be. And these are small things that even at community level they can do it. So that's why I always say dipping is important. We need to look at what is happening around it and develop a more holistic solution. I think that the biggest problem is water.
I think I agree with you there. It's around some of them are not working because of the seasonality of water.
Water is the biggest problem that farmers are facing. Because imagine you have to feed in 15,000 liters and it's dry like this. They don't even have enough water to drink. let alone just to put into the picture. So I think if the issue of water is addressed, most of the problems that we are facing, they are very small.
So maybe,
Sorry, yeah.
maybe Fadzai could just come in and walk us through the story of the ZRBF Malana program as to what was done there regarding dip
Can you
tanks.
just confirm that the dip tanks don't belong to DBS, they belong to the rural council?
I think so,
Yeah, they don't belong to DBS. It's not a good issue, it's DBS is government. And all infrastructure in the district belongs to the rural council. So there's differences.
Yes.
All right, so under the Melana program, we rehabilitated all newly constructed 15 tanks. So the construction cost anywhere between 20 and 30,000. This is going to bare ground. Then the rehabilitation, as Dr. Kamijanje said, can cost anything from 500 to over 10,000, depending on how dilapidated the dip tank was. Is the community prepared to contribute? There's a new dip tank we built in Unguza in a community called Matabiswana. They vocalized that they needed a dip tank, and we reached an agreement that what can you put and what can the program put. So they paid $3,000 for the laborer, and then we supplied the material that is purchased off the market, and then they also supplied the locally available material. There was also a dip tank that was rehabilitated in Umzingwani, Soche dip tank. The community, I'll use this term carefully, contributed $6,000. Why I say careful is because it was the diversion of the subsidy. We had provided stock feed after drought, and the agreement was we cannot provide free stock feed. So they paid $3.50 per bag. So instead of us taking the money, it was rechanneled into a dip tank. So we've had communities contribute, and the potential is there. And I think that's how we have to look at it as a program, because even if you look at the most developed countries, the state subsidizes agriculture. It cannot all go to the community. So I think we are hopeful of ZRBF2. And even without ZRBF2, there are other development programs. I think there needs to be an intentional partnership between the private sector and the development program to say what can the development partner contribute, because the development partner stands for the state. It may not be, it may be external funding, but they represent the state. So that's state funding. And then the private sector comes and then complements the state funding. I think we can move and cover, what do you call it? The right mileage if we work together like that, because development funding will always be there, and it's there to cover what the community can't fund and what the private sector can't fund, and then the private sector comes and sustains the model after that.
Thank you. So there's a question here from Temba at FAO. So we've got FAO in good attendance today. Good afternoon, colleagues. We are interested in upscaling the model in Matabeleland South. One issue that has been observed is the security concerns around the handling of cash by government officers at the district offices. Have you thought about doing it differently so that government officials concentrate on their technical expertise without handling too large sums of cash? That is not really what the government should be doing. I think we did touch on that, and there's not really a good solution at the moment.
Yeah, we've certainly given it a lot of thought without very effective solutions. You know, suggestions that have come up, you know, traveling around with security guards or having security people stationed, it's just not sustainable.
No.
So it's a massive problem, and we'd be very keen to hear of anybody who's got good suggestions around that, because we share the thought that it is a big risk.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got Coopers here today in presence, but the problem is much bigger than Coopers, as
Yeah.
Jane said. You know, there are a lot of players on the market, but Coopers is the one that's been taking, you know, the first steps, and hopefully, you know, there could be some sort of combined industry type of arrangement.
No, I was just going to say the Midlands, they've suggested that the LDCs actually open bank accounts, but that is also dependent on a bank that is reliable, where they can actually go and deposit the money. But it means that they are coming from wherever to Gope Center to deposit the money. So the challenge needs to be traced right from the farmer when they give their money to DBS at the deep tank level and how it moves. So I think they still need a lot to be done in terms of just trying to understand what should be done. But it's an important point.
Thank you. And then also from Jonathan, having worked with private sector for a while, I know it's not easy for a company that's helped shape a certain model from infancy to allow other actors to come on board. In the interest of competition, for the best value for farmers, is the model open for other players to come on board? And I think the answer is yes. It's just that Coopers is taking the first steps, but I think the model is open to anyone who wants to invest in it. That right, Kuzi?
Yeah, I think so. There's nothing stopping anyone.
Yeah.
But I will trace back to the financial question. I know that finance infrastructure, like in terms of reception for mobile money, is limited in some of the areas. But the solution we are talking about, whatever traction we can make, it's a discussion that cannot be held without developers of mobile money. They need to be at the table to brainstorm on the way forward.
Then from Maria Goss, it's a very inspiring model, which has been presented. My only query is that during its implementation over the last few years, were there deliberate efforts made to identify which other natural and human capital support systems might be critical for the sustenance of this model? I don't know who's going to answer that one.
Trying to understand the
I
question.
know, I was going to say, I'll give it to Quincy.
So Maria is Maria is a development practice, and also it's coming.
Okay, what natural capital?
They're talking about things other than dipping. What
No, it's all about dipping. So I think what Maria is trying to say is what other sort of resources have we sort of pulled in to try and make it more robust in terms of human resources, but also natural resources. I'm not quite sure what those would be, but let me just see.
I think if I can sort of touch on that, maybe, Michael, I think, these models needs resources, it needs people, it needs equipment, it needs vehicles, it needs, what I mean? It's, we basically got a department of people that
are responsible, headed by Joseph, specifically looking at this. So it does require a major investment as far as certainly human capital is concerned, and then and obviously the financial resources that go with that. So definitely to make it work, you need to give it the necessary attention and the necessary resources. Otherwise, it's not an easy thing to. I think that's also going to be made clear. It's not an easy thing to do because of all the things we've been talking about today. And Jane, definitely.
So from all the experiences and lessons learned over the last 3 or so years, certainly if I was in the business of selling a carrier side, I'd draw up a list of selection criteria, and number 1 would be look for a really supportive DBS officer. 2, supportive traditional leadership. 3, make sure logistics is not going to be too expensive, and so on and so forth. And that's the way I would target it. It's not really a development goal, but this is the private sector. Yeah. It's up to development partners and government then to try and reach those who are sort of more further away.
And those are definitely the things that one looks at in reaching a community.
Yeah. And then for Maria as well, water remains the greatest challenge affecting range, felt and pasture quality and productivity. What else can be introduced in terms of relevant and appropriate technologies or techniques to enhance sustainability? And there, I think we did touch on the spray race model. I mean, you just can't get away. Yeah, how many liters did you say? 50,000? 15,000 liters.
For a
per
dip tank.
plunge pool, yeah,
Yeah.
so there's no getting away from that, but there may be other models such as the spur-verse model. I don't know that tick grease has been very effective as compared to the plunge pool.
Yeah, I think what's important to understand in our opinion, tick grease on its own is not a solution. Tick grease in conjunction with dipping
Yes.
is a better solution. So again, it's the training and it's understanding around that. But yes, you know, a spray race would need less water. Yeah. But again, lots of logistics around that and
lots of maintenance.
the management. I was going to say the management of the spray race, making sure that nozzles are clean and functioning and so on.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. I don't know any more sort of burning questions. We sort of, is there one more coming to?
Hand up from my.
Okay. Would you like to put on landing? Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, you can come in.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just want to clarify maybe on the question I asked earlier in the chat box. I was looking at, besides looking at yes, obviously there's need for a lot of financial input and also the human resources, even at the ward level, who might also need to be capacitated in terms of maintenance and also carrying out the dipping programs. But I wanted us to try and go beyond that and look at, there's a need for a lot of water. What are we doing? I can give us an example of Matobo, which is in Mat South. It's a very dry area. And people need to walk long distances just to get water for domestic uses. In some areas, they actually have duties to go and empty and fill the deep tanks so that they can always bring in the new acaricides once the cycle is finished. Are there any efforts which have been planned or which have been identified maybe to try and harvest rainwater harvesting? Because being in that area for over 3-4 years, I've also noticed that there are times it receives a lot of rainfall during the first quarter of the rainy season, and then we go back to the dry season. But are we putting in any efforts to try and harness that water? Because we need to kind of think outside the box, because the climate change impacts and the extreme weather events are here to stay. So what other efforts are we thinking about as people who are involved in this value chain? Because the local area communities won't be able to manage it because they are not adapting very well to the climate change impact. So what else are we thinking about in terms of making this model, which is so promising and has got so significantly positive results? What else needs to be done before we move on to scaling it up? Perhaps can we identify certain areas where we can try to invest more in the low cost rainwater harvesting? It doesn't have to be very expensive technologies, and that I think will also help. Another issue which I'm trying to understand is, are we also going out to the communities and trying to evaluate the rangeland, the natural pastures? Because in other districts where we are working with farmer field schools model, there's a lot of concern which is coming out that the moribund grass, which the cattle live, which has become unpalatable, is actually a source of these ticks breeding places. So each time they take their cattle or livestock to the deep, they'll still come back to the communities, and those cattle will just go back into those areas which are breeding sites for these ticks. So are we taking more time to also build the community's capacity to understand the cycles and how to even manage these ticks at community level without just necessarily relying on the tick grease and the deep tanks? Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Over to you.
And I'm not a water engineer, but whatever harvesting method is used on the dip tanks, it has to supply year-round supply. So if I'll ask Dr. Mjanje to maybe share on how often the water is replaced in the dip tank. Are you aware on how often they drain and replace?
Well, they've got to top. Once it's done with the initial fill, then it's got to be topped up.
Okay.
Every animal will carry 4 liters.
Yeah.
Okay.
So every week there is a top up required.
Okay. So whatever water harvesting structure, I don't think we can use small structures. Oh, my limited knowledge of engineering. So we would need someone to come in, but I don't think they can be a low cost water harvesting structure. It can be comparatively less expensive, but I cannot see how a low cost water harvesting structure, if I interpret the speaker right, can work here. But moving on to how we can address other animal health issues. As we said, under Melana, we'd identified 18 dip tanks that had contributed their funds for 6 months plus, with the highest performer contributing for over a year. And we started to work with them to layer other animal health interventions. And because we realized that it's not only about parasites, there are other animal health issues. We actually had done research on ethno-veterinary medicine with university students for the treatment of diseases. So we collected the information from farmers on what they use naturally and that can treat diseases. And the first experiment was done on internal parasites. And there are 3 plants that were effective, ranging from 50% reduction to over 70% reduction in the egg count, which then reflects the worm infestation. But there's a whole range of plants to be researched on. There are marketing issues, and there is no topic that can't come into this center, including issues to do with tick infestation in the rangeland. Of course, some require maybe beyond our capacity to address, but we felt that with those high-performing dip tanks, we can even start to look at issues of on-farm fodder production, using desert plants for the drier regions and maybe plants which require a little bit more water for the wetter regions. So to answer the question is, I think if we target high-performing dip tanks, we can start layering other activities that feed into the animal value chain or the agriculture value chain. I hope I answered the question.
Mike, can I come in?
Yeah.
So I think the questions that Maria is posing, they are important questions. I think the conversation should go towards who else needs to go on the table. Who else? Who have we left out on the table? Because I think that the reason why we are talking about this thing today is because we are focusing on dipping, but there are a lot more issues that need to be resolved, more stakeholders that need to come in. So as Coopers, I think we've got an area of specialization that we focus on. We also need other guys to come along the value chain to try and understand. We had a very interesting case in Pinga where we went to try and introduce the model to the traditional leaders. What they said was, we are happy to have the model. Our biggest problem is that we don't have the money to buy the acaricide because our cattle market is very disorganized. So then we had to come in with market players to come in and, So I think what is going to happen is we are going to layer issues until we get to the point where we say almost all the issues that affect the livestock sector are covered. And that's what we want to do. Who else needs to be part of this conversation so that it's not a one-sided discussion that we are doing. I think it's much broader than that. And we need to see how best we can move, but move as quickly as possible, because the more we talk, sometimes the more the cattle are dying as well. So we need to balance both.
Thank you, Joseph. Funny, did you say there's another hand?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can come in, Mr. Gutsa. You're muted.
Off because of network challenges. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So I might have missed a lot of details as the discussion was unfolding, but I wanted to check on something that I noted. You know, I was impressed when a colleague presented their efforts to transform the thinking of communities so that they take livestock as cash. I have a challenge to proffer and put on the table amongst colleagues present. Has there been any initiative to put on the table, you know, an initiative that will collateralize cattle so that farmers can access funding against the cash in their cattle pens? Is there any entity that has tried to model out an initiative where farmers can actually access funding, putting on the table cattle as collateral? Thank you.
Sort of like he looks after cattle. People come and bank their cattle with him, and they come back and take their cattle. He looks after them, and he takes the cattle after the people take back their cattle after a number of years, and obviously they leave a portion. Of course, on the news it says it's successful, but obviously the devil is always in the detail. But I think it opens up such institutionalization of cattle rearing, especially if it's invested into by the private sector, may open up opportunity for a farmer to say, my cattle are with this X institution, because over there, then obviously no one is going to put their cattle where there's no proper security, fencing, animal health. And therefore it's less risk for anyone who wants to take collateral, take that animal's collateral, than when it's in the rural area where right now maybe the bankers foresee as cattle in the rural area is a mine of risk, animal health, security.
Yeah.
So I think it can be thought of. I don't know of anything else other than that, but that's not to say it's not there. But I can be happy to share with Michael, and can share with the platform the link to that initiative.
All right. So I hope you got Kudzai agreement. We'll investigate. I don't know if there's any other thoughts from delegates. Joseph, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, there's another angle which we have not spoken about in this forum, but which is really critical. It is the issue about traceability. Because for this thing to work, if I go and I leave my cattle at a farm, I need to be sure that they're still there and they're still alive. But traceability is bigger than that. I think one of the reasons why we struggle to export beef to the EU at the moment is because there's no traceability system. And I think for me, the traceability system, if designed properly, can solve most of the problems that we're facing even right now. Even for DVS, if you ask DVS, how many cattle we have in the country, there's a figure that is banded around all the time, 5.3 million. It doesn't matter which year, you know. Our experience is that there could be more cattle than what we think we have, but we cannot say that for sure. Some of the challenges that DVS is facing with animal diseases, such as foot and mouth, is because animals are moving all over the place during the day, during the night. And there's no way that you can cordon off an area and lock it up and no permits are issued because we don't have the traceability system. So I think one of the things that needs to come here is even then it makes it easier for us to know at this particular deep tank, we've got 1,500 cattle. And this is the amount of acaricide that is required.
Yeah.
So I think a bigger discussion also needs to go towards traceability.
So traceability before collateralization.
That's more. Yeah. You can't have collateralization without traceability.
Yeah.
Just to echo what Joseph was saying, I think that is the key thing. Collateralization is going to be is virtually impossible without traceability. And there are various systems that are being looked at. There is an organization called livestock, which So livestock is currently running certain pilot schemes around the country. whereby they're using RFID tags, which is then linked to the cloud, where call it a banker, if you will, or an owner can monitor that their animal is being dipped and dosed and cared for on a weekly basis or on a regular basis, not needing to be on the farm, but physically they can do that from a remote place. So that's something to be looked at.
Yeah, it's a huge discussion, traceability, and yeah, I think one for another forum. Yeah, so I think we've run out of time, everyone. So I guess it's just to say thanks to our panelists. Thanks, Chris and Kuze. Thanks to everybody who's joined us, either physically, especially physically, but also online. You guys online, we'd love to see you here in the room. But until next time, it's bye-bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just ask Tony to put up a picture of the achievements that communities can have, if it is to help convince the floor that
development runs through her blood.
That some of the achievements of the project did not contribute money, but just training for mindset change. So just hopefully it can always give you that extra mileage in convincing that communities have power, and we can scale this to improve the management of irrigation schemes, anything that is institutionalized. Thank you.
Something like that.